Shannon has been in Toastmasters for about 6 years, and some work days on Zoom feel just as long to her, and probably all of us. On her Toastmasters journey, she's found a passion for creating educational content, whether it's during YLP or at her work's career center. She squeaked in earning her DTM in the Legacy program and thought she needed to say goodbye to District 31 as she moved to New Hampshire. But here's the silver lining of the pandemic. We're not rid of her quite yet. Tonight, Shannon will be sharing tips and best practices for participating and presenting in online meetings, ending with an interactive workshop to help make your Zoom speeches a little bit more dynamic. This will be a partially interactive workshop with a breakout room session at the end. Please use the chat feature to interact with her. Also, think about an opening line of a talk or a speech that's felt dull on Zoom and bring that to the breakout session at the conclusion of her formal presentation. Please join me in welcoming Shannon Plesh.
My fellow Toastmasters and friends, this all looks familiar. Is this the 4th, 400th, 800th Zoom meeting today? I can't wait, much like might all you are, until the presenter says those famous words. Hold on, let me share my screen. And right away, that's our cue. We're off screen. We're living in our little box. We're living back on Facebook. Our time is done of paying attention. Would you do that during a live meeting at work? No, of course you wouldn't. However, raise your hand if you're doing that on Zoom. I'm just as guilty. About a year ago, we're thrown into this strange world. In this strange world, we seem to be dressed up only from the neck up. There seems to be PJ couture. Masks are in, pants are out. But this doesn't mean we're not still at work. Are we being rude without realizing it? The topic of my discussion is exactly that. What are we supposed to be doing during an online meeting? If you're like me, one day I was told to stop coming in the office. But those meetings didn't stop. Also, how have your speeches changed? How have your work talks changed since jumping into this virtual world? If you're like many of us, the second you're out of speaker view, you're checked out. How can we do this better? Along the way, I've picked up some tips and tricks of staying home for over a year with my little black cat, Boo. First and foremost, I want to take a little survey. We all have been on a Zoom, WebEx, webinar, what have you. What's the strangest thing that you've seen? Not when you're a presenter, but just watching people in the background. Did you catch someone picking their nose? Did you hear someone who wasn't quite on mute? And they should have been. Put it in the chat. What's the strangest thing you saw? As the responses come in, I'm going to comment on ones I find funny. Combing their beard. I thought you said bread. How do you comb bread? Oh, Zoom bombers. That's one of my favorites. You learn really quickly how to take care of that. Oh, I had a cat climbing on my head too. Those are some good ones. Keep them coming in. We're going to save the chat. The goal when you're in a Zoom meeting or any kind of virtual meeting is to not be the center of attention. Does that sound pretty obvious? Not quite. First and foremost, here are some little tips and best practices to ensure the speaker is the center of attention instead of you. If you're like me and can't see more than 5 feet in front of their face, your glasses might be giving you away. I thought these were anti-glare. However, imagine you're in a full screen of Zoom. The background is very, very dark. And depending where you are, your background might be dark too. There goes the speaker sharing their screen and you're flipping between other screens. Imagine the contrast between the black Zoom background and what Microsoft Word might look like, or anything else. It could be blue, yellow, orange. Now in your glasses, and you can see a little bit in mine, you can see a little bit of green flipping back and forth. Hey, what's Shannon doing? That looks way more interesting. And now you're PMing me to see what I'm up to, even though I'm not presenting. Another obvious tip, stay on mute. Shouldn't we all be staying on mute in case something happens? Shannon, I live alone. There's no kids going to run in. My husband, who also wears pants, isn't going to run in. I'm in the same boat. I'm not anticipating any distractions. However, I'm going to give you a very real example of what happened to me. I'm on a Zoom meeting, and who rolls up but my very loud neighbor? They are blasting Maroon 5 as loud as they can outside their car window. My walls were shaking, but I was on mute. The biggest reason people don't stay on mute is because they anticipate questions. They anticipate needing to give a comment or answer something very quickly. Imagine your boss says, I need these numbers. My cursor's up here. The mute button's down there. But what's right in front of you? The space bar. If you press and hold the space bar, it will temporarily unmute you for the duration of however you'd like. And as soon as you release it, you're back on mute. Very, very handy, but watch where you're putting your books or your food plates that aren't on the space bar. Ask me how I know that. Next up is a favorite of mine. Who loves virtual backgrounds? Raise your hand. What's your favorite virtual background to use? And you don't have to say Toastmasters. It's okay, this isn't a test. I've seen everything from swirling aurora borealis to cute little cupcakes. Oh, that was not fun during my 8 a.m. meeting. But what's most distracting about virtual backgrounds, while they're a lot of fun, is somebody getting bored in the middle of a talk and flipping between them. It's really easy because there's such a huge contrast in the virtual backgrounds, especially if you have a green screen. Now I'm watching to see what people are coming up with. Whoa, I didn't see that one before. Bernie Sanders, that's a fun one. If you're going to use a virtual background, please feel free. Change it at the beginning of the meeting. That way, if we're looking to see where Bernie ended up next, we can say, oh, that's funny, I remember that meme. And then by the time the meeting starts, we're over it, we're used to it. And as long as you're not flipping back and forth with it, it's no longer taking away attention. Finally, who loves 8 a.m. meetings? Yeah. I know someone's up at 3. I bet you love this. I get really hungry at 8 a.m. meetings. Actually, I'm hungry all the time, but that's okay. If you need to eat or if you need to walk around, turn your video off. I usually like to have my video on for the duration of the meeting, as it's good to react instead of talking to blank screens. Anyone who's been through the humorous speech contest knows how much fun it is to talk to a bunch of black squares. Here's why it's important if you need to grab your laptop charger real quick to turn your video off. This is now suddenly what you look like. I've seen meetings where I'm paying attention to the speaker and suddenly I'm getting vertigo. Just be aware. Keep it off for as long as you need to. Don't make your coworkers hungry, because I can smell my burrito and I'm watching you eat cereal instead of watching the presentation. I hope that helped you at the next time you're at a virtual meeting without having to get up and say, uh-oh, my turn to present. We're all public speakers here. I think we are. Have you been to a Zoom meeting that felt very much like the embodiment of death by PowerPoint? Have you been to a Zoom meeting where you would rather just be that little forehead and not really talk, just get through it as fast as you can and hope it's over quickly? It felt like an icebreaker, didn't it? The next part of my presentation, I want to go over what are some best practices if you are presenting. Next, I'm going to go into some best practices to make your speech a little bit more dynamic. And finally, we're going to go over some openings to really give it that final punch. First and foremost, what you wear matters. Yes, half of us aren't wearing pants. That's not what I'm talking about. Anyone who saw my demo video might have noticed something a little strange. I was wearing black and white polka dots. I rewatched that video, and every time I shifted and moved, I was now watching my shirt. Solid colors are best. Contrasting solid colors are best. If you're like me and don't see much of the light of day, I like the contrast as much of myself versus my clothes versus the background. That way you can see every move I make. Imagine for a moment that I was using a virtual background, or I was wearing a beige sweater. I might be a floating head instead of Shannon. Virtual backgrounds are a lot of fun, but without a green screen, you can lose both your body or props. If you're using a prop during a virtual background, you have to hold it against a solid color if you're holding it in front of you. It will fade right into the background and be a very confusing moment, especially if you practiced and now you might be a little thrown off. Who has been to this meeting? Person sitting. So the numbers say, yep. Swing. I do it, you do it. I'm as fidgety as any of us. But when you're speaking, even if you're sitting, put both feet down on the floor. I promise your speech will be over as soon as possible. Try to be less of a distraction as you can. Imagine that CC manual where you eliminate distractions, not just try to do purposeful movements. Also, if I know I'm fidgety, and I'm a very fidgety person, I think it was my third speech, I had somebody count how many times I zipped and unzipped my hoodie. That was a lot of fun. If you remember Angela Nuss, tie your hair back if you know you're going to touch it. Anything that you know could cause a nervous tic, know it ahead of time, try to prevent it. Use of space. How important do we know this is? Duh. How do we do that on Zoom? If you're standing, give yourself enough room that you can have about elbow up. This allows you to gesture and use more space than if you were closer. The biggest thing I've seen with being too close is what I like to call phantom hands. You're gesturing, you love talking with your hands, but they're kind of popping in and out. Whoa, where'd those come from? Give yourself the context and enough room to use that space. Mark the floor if you have to. Know where your cat is at all times. And you can use your hands as if you were in real person. Shannon, this is all well and good, but I'm still nervous. I am too. You didn't see me an hour ago. However, have I done this speech so many times that my neighbors could recite it? Also, yes. I still think they can hear me because I do hear their vacuum. So next time I give this presentation, I'm going to delegate it. Practice makes perfect. We know that. But practice at work too. Imagine if you had a work speech and you didn't run through it in 5 minutes when your boss gave you 10. Some tips I like to use on Zoom. Go on and record yourself. It's uncomfortable at first. So instead, here, I'm not sure if you know this, but you get 2 files when you record yourself on Zoom. You get audio and video and audio only. Sit and listen to yourself. You might be talking faster than you realize. You might be hearing opportunities as if you're an evaluator to say, oh, I can pause there. Oh, there's a funny joke my coworkers would like. Give yourself that opportunity to practice once just with yourself. Listen audio only if you need to, and watch it back. You're going to be way ahead of everyone else who throws up the PowerPoint, goes 5 seconds, and says, thank you. I know another little trick. Who here has been at a meeting that has gone absolutely perfectly? Anyone who raises their hand is a liar. Practice distracted. Try putting on music at random intervals. Try doing it at a time of day where you know there's a lot of cars outside. Once you practice in imperfect environments, it becomes easy to regain your focus. I like to use bullet points instead of reading complete sentences. And this goes with distractions because you're reading, car honk. Where was I? I lost my place, completely distracted. Practice until you can do it and your neighbors get sick of it. Another thing I like to do if I'm nervous or if there's a big meeting, I like to have an audience plant. A friendly face who I know is going to laugh at all my corny jokes. A friendly face who's just going to go, yeah, great. Of course, you want to make eye contact with everyone, and that could be difficult. I can look into the camera light all I want, but I want to see you, right? I want to see your smiling faces and I want to see you laugh. I'm not in the humor speech contest. I can see you. One trick I learned is you can hide non-participant videos. This gives you fewer boxes to work with. If I stand back, my peripheral vision can see more of you, and I can still look at the camera. This is important because if you're watching a presenter and they're focused on themselves, this is what I look like if I'm watching myself instead of looking like I'm breaking that fourth wall and talking to you. Connect with the audience between that screen, as difficult as it is. You and I and the rest of the world seem to be living in a box. Hopefully not for much longer. I'm not going to miss wearing pants again, but I'm going to miss that connection. Zoom has its limitations, but with these little tips and little practice tricks, we can break that fourth wall just a little bit more. Be the presenters and be those dynamic presenters that we know we can be. That brings me to my next point. What's your opening? What's the most common opening you've heard at work during work meetings? How does everybody open? What have you heard? And you can say filler words. You can say on today's presentation.
Can you hear me?
You're muted. Yes, let's get started. I guess I'll start real confident. Why is this important? The next part of this presentation is going to be a breakout room workshop. I want to bridge that gap between work presentations and Toastmaster presentations. Don't be afraid to open with something with a little bit more punch. Hey guys, happy 3 p.m. Or send out the presentation ahead of time and ask for audience feedback. Oh, here's an update. I love hearing that because that's never good news. Don't be afraid to open with a question. Don't be afraid to open with something that you might even workshop at Toastmasters. It doesn't have to be so different. We're not here practicing to be perfect Toastmasters, except for me, obviously. We're here to practice, to have these skills in real life. How do they translate? I'm going to answer that question in the next session in the breakout room. I believe we're at time. I think that's another Zoomism. So I want to hand it back to our Zoom master. Thank you for your attention today. And you're all muted still, haha.
Shannon, thank you very much. Appreciate the great presentation, helping us to understand how to be more dynamic, professional, and less distracted during Zoom meetings. I also learned, but it's not helpful to me, to make sure my hair is pulled back. For all attendees, please remember to fill out your online session raffle entry form